idea was, let's do this whole thing live. I wanted everybody in the room, same time, to be able to react to everybody else. I felt that that offered the freedom to go and just do whatever we wanted. The key here is, who are the right people? Who are the people who are open-minded to it, who have a great sense of improvisation, who can really listen to each other. And allow themselves to go with what's happening. And the thing that I love the most is they stay true to themselves.
These guys, they could add what they do to Joel's music. I mean, he made it apparent that I want to hear what you guys do. I don't want to tell you what to do.
If the music is really good, you can really experiment and explore. And when you're playing with people so filled with experience, it allows you to have the chance of really sort of playing something that might be sort of transcendental.
Joel's music, is very clear, and there's a lot of beauty in his music and a lot of open space. That's one of the main things I live for as a musician, as an improviser, is when these unexpected things happen, when everybody sort of coalesces into a different direction than what might have happened just before that.
This is not a straight-ahead jazz project, but the discipline that all these musicians bring comes from the discipline of improvisation. So there's an energy that happens. Nobody is playing anything really exactly the same way twice.
The sound that was created at the power station with the band is the essence of the album. When we recorded the basic tracks, we knew at that point that we were going to want some special guests on the album. So we had this wonderful period of time to experiment even further after the recording session. So the next step was to sit down and really look at the arrangements. The challenge became everything else that we recorded, making that the essence of the album also, as if the entire album could have been recorded live. I think about the player. I don't always think about the instrument. I think about, who do I want to be performing on this? It was the same thing when we chose the players for the basic session. And we were just really lucky to end up with an amazing group of guests on this album. We have Randy Brecker, amazing, legendary trumpet player, Brandy Younger, a recent Grammy nominee, amazing harpist, John Patitucci, who has this amazing pedigree playing with everybody in jazz, starting his career with Chick Corea, Philippe Sace, who's also played with everybody from Chaka Khan to Al Jarreau, everyone else. Gosh, just incredible. And then to have Lisa Fischer, played with Rolling Stones, Sting, Grammy winner herself. Gosh, that just put us over the top.
It's all like family. We found a groove from beat one. We've all played in different configurations, just not together as a group. This music is really truly composed and allows a lot of atmospheric space to just kind of be in the moment. And the way everybody's really playing and swimming together, it has that essence and that appeal to it.
All these musicians I've played with quite a bit, so we'll find a vibe almost immediately. And the big thing is, with Joel's vision, is to try and figure out how we can put our improvisations to best use. But it's not until we really get into the studio and start working together to flesh out those ideas.
When I start to read all the names that were to be involved, I could already hear the sounds, and I'm pretty sure he could as well. So immediately there's a loop, there's a way to listen to each other, and we bring our hearts, and it's a band. It's got that strength and that the spirit of a band. Makes it exciting. Joel yet to trust us, to take his universe somewhere, so it's magical.
Every single step of this project has been full of joy and wonder and exploration, vulnerability. It's a whole bunch of exquisite moments put together.
Welcome, everybody. Glad to see everyone here today, in live and direct, as well as out in Facebook land. And I'm going to read a little intro about our guests in a moment. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Elliot Scheiner. I'm the co-chair of AES New York Section, mix engineer, and I'm very happy to be here today with a little disclaimer. Two old friends of mine, Joel and I went to high school together, and that was in the late 70s. And Joe and I met in the early 80s and did a lot of interaction on synthesizers and MIDI, and we were always cohorts on that subject. So in any case, that's me. Now, let's introduce our guests. Of course, it's a very busy time of year right now with the Grammys coming up and the AES convention, so we're excited to squeeze this in before then. And besides introducing Joel Goodman, the artist of the record, and Joe Mardin, the producer of the record, we'll be talking about the actual album that they did, which is called An Exquisite Moment, and that was released recently in past June, that just passed. So I'll read these intros because I think they're informative, and then we'll get into a little conversation. So to quote the Wall Street Journal, Joel Goodman has contributed to many of the most prominent nonfiction films of the past 30 years. Emmy-winning composer Joel Goodman creates emotion through music. As a multi-talented composer for feature films, documentaries, television, album releases, performance ensembles, and other forms of collaborative media. His signature style thrives in musical settings that express the full range of human emotion. With An Exquisite Moment, Goodman's deeply personal and improvisation-rich debut album of full experience music, the Emmy-winning composer embarks on an epic journey of self-discovery alongside some of the most accomplished and creative names in jazz. Some guests: Randy Brecker on the flugelhorn and trumpet, Brandy Younger on the harp, Lisa Fisher, our old friend, vocalist, John Petrucci, the bass player, playing some great bass, of course, and Philippe Saez, another good friend of mine, on piano, vibes, and marimba. Joining the A-Team core group consisted of Donny McCaslin, saxophones. McCaslin, excuse me. These guys will be correcting me a couple times tonight. Eric Hartland on drums and Adam Rogers on guitar. Mino Cinélu. I've always wondered how to pronounce your name, Mino. Percussion. And Scott Colley on bass. Scott Colley on bass, and Goodman himself on keyboards and bass. Okay, try not to batch up too much more. An Emmy winner and four-time Emmy nominee known for deeply nuanced sound filled with intricate subtleties, Goodman's diverse body of work includes scores of over 150 films and television programs that have received 5 Oscar nominations, 30 Emmy Awards, and over 40 Emmy nominations. He has scored over 40 films for HBO and composed the main theme for the long-running and critically acclaimed PBS series American Experience. His scores can regularly be heard in movie theaters and on televisions around the world. His notable award-winning films include Orbit on Amazon, Everything is Copy on HBO, Claude Lanzmann, Spectres of the Shah on HBO, Walt Disney for PBS, An Honest Liar on Netflix, Being Elmo on PBS, Once Upon a Time in Queens, ESPN, Murders Among the Mormons, Netflix, and Loudmouth on Greenwich Entertainment. As a record producer, Joel's credits include releases for Chuck Mangione, Livingston Taylor, and Carl Lothar, to name a few. Moving over to our next guest on this illustrious panel, Joe Mardin. Joe is a producer, arranger, mixer, composer, and musician whose credits include Chaka Khan, Jewel, George Benson, Whitney Houston, Aha, Anita Baker, Balin, Raul Madon.
Canzoniere Grecanico Salentino.
Buono.
Otherwise known as CGS.
Paul Carrack, Queen Latifah, Corey Glover, and Aretha Franklin. Joe's productions and or arrangements have featured Paul Rogers, Jason Mraz, Paquito de Rivera,
Excellent.
Carlos Santana, well, I know these people, Vince Gill, and Toots Tillman. Amazing. With his arrangements having been recorded by the Metropolo Orchestre, featuring Raul Madon, great musician, and played by the Los Angeles Philharmonic at the Hollywood Bowl. That was Aha performance. As a musician, Joe has played on recordings from Michael McDonald, Boy Meets Girl, Patti LaBelle, Run DMC featuring Everlast, and good old Willie Nelson. Most recently, his original music and sound design for the play Noises in My Head were featured at the Sonic Sphere at a 360 immersive sound and light experience in a suspended 650-foot diameter concert hall in New York City's The Shed. That was recently in the summer, that event. Joe also co-directed and co-produced the Grammy-nominated documentary The Greatest Years in Town, The Arif Mardin Story. In case you guys haven't put it together, Arif was Joe's dad. Joe has released an electronica album, Fairy Tales Interrupted under his own name, and will release a second solo album in 2024. So that's the intros. Sorry I botched it, but as you can see, we have some very talented and well-experienced guests on this panel. And, oh goodness, sorry. Turn that off. Victor Lacomer says hello. So, now, today we're going to discuss the timeline of the album's inception and creation through the many steps involved in its production. Let's start with the actual tracking sessions, and then we'll rewind a bit onto the timeline. So let's start with you, Joel. Joel, where did you do the tracking of the songs, and with whom did you collaborate on these sessions in that recording stage?
Right, so in the first step, the initial concept was that when I wrote the music, I wanted it to be something that there was a band in the room. I didn't want to just do the whole thing overdub. And I wanted everybody to respond to each other's playing. This was central to me in the concept for the album. So it became important to think about who we were going to have and how the players would interact. And it was interesting because in the end, all the players had worked with each other, but not together as that group before. So they all knew each other, which was great that they had some experience that way, although it wasn't planned that way. So we went into the studio, 6 of us, at the power station for 2 days, and we recorded all of the tunes, basically, in that time. The other key was that there were no rehearsals, and musicians didn't see or hear the music until a week before. So there were only sketches. I did not do full demos. All the sketches were just bass, harmony, melody. That was it. And my feeling was Eric and Mino would be able to find the rhythm from that and what everybody else was playing. I didn't program any drums or percussion. And I didn't program anybody else's parts because I wanted to hear what they were going to play and how we were all going to interact based on what somebody else played. a rather old school notion in terms of how music is produced today.
In that step of where you presented the music to the musicians, was it an audio demo, or did you do what you normally do with scoring?
Right. So about a week before, I sent everybody my sketch as an audio file, but I had also at that point written charts that were very clear for everybody. But there was only one chart of each tune, so it would, if there was a bass line, the bass line was on that chart. If there's a melody, of course, the melody was there. The chord changes were there. If there's one of the songs, The Mystery of Trees, has a very specific guitar part, that's an accompaniment, that was written. But the idea was to give everybody the same thing, like a band. When a band comes in to kind of rehearse or play the song for the first time. And when you have great players, you come up with these parts. You kind of rely on the players to do that. It's one of the things I loved when I played.
Part of the magic that happens.
Yeah, I loved that when I used to play in bands. You know, it was always, I was a bass player, and I was playing bass in bands, you know, back in that time, and it was fun to kind of like, oh yeah, if I do this, then that other person starts doing that, and then it just takes on a life of its own. That was the idea, and I wanted to capture the lightning in the bottle. Catch the, you know, almost everything came from like the first two takes, maybe 3 takes, and we didn't, only on 1 or 2 songs that we recorded a 4th take. We didn't even record most of the time past the 3rd take, because you know there's that graph. Have you ever seen that graph where it's like it's great, it's great, it's great, and then suddenly it goes down. Then there's a little blip. There's like this you know,
statistically speaking,
yeah, but
you're not
you know,
get
after that,
better.
it's like it's not going to get any better if we play it 5 or 6 or 7 times, you know. So that was it. Yeah, that's how the sessions happened.
Cool. And how many compositions are on the record? Number of?
There are 7 compositions. The 7th one has 4 movements to it, so that's an extended piece.
Right.
And if you're streaming the album, or even on CD, actually, CD and streaming, they're different
tags and IDs.
They're different IDs, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because each one of those movements has a title and a theme.
Exactly.
Even though it's an astral projection, it's got a different element to it.
Exactly, exactly. So it's really meant to take you on a journey. That's
Very
the
good.
idea.
Yeah, I think people, if they haven't heard the record, owe it to themselves to listen. It is quite a journey, a great one at that. And
Thank you.
okay, so that's just very summarized that 2 days. And you lightly mentioned the musicians, although I think we're going to be more descriptive about everybody as we move forward. So we'll clarify all the people that played on it. I know I mentioned names and stuff, but just to connect the dots for people.
Sure.
So let's throw a question to Joe. Joe, as a musician and magician, producer and engineer, please share with us some of what you did as you and Joel started and continued to work together on this album. So now I'm sort of jumping, maybe even before the days at the 2 days at Power Station.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the producer's gig and how that gig went in the interaction with you and Joel on this record.
It was great because Joel was sending me the compositions as he was writing them. And it gave me the opportunity to kind of be like an A&R person, really, more than a producer in a way. And he would take my suggestions, and so that was great because I felt like I could help form the sort of the material. And it was just a fun process of having this music unfold before my eyes and my ears, so to speak. There wasn't that much that I did at that point. I was a sounding board, and I was trying to be helpful, basically.
Right. Well, that's an essential part of the gig, right?
Yes.
The producer has to be a support of the artist they're working
Absolutely. And it's funny because we were listening to some material yesterday for the new record, which we won't get ahead of ourselves, and Joel played me a demo from back then, and we were like, why didn't we record this one too? This is actually good.
Yeah, you saved it for the next one.
Yeah, exactly.
More gems.
But there were other things also that happened during that time. We were talking about players.
Yes.
Which players we
You're
wanted to
absolutely
work
right.
with.
We were auditioning musicians, and we were sending each other. I'd say, check this album out. Maybe we could use so and so, and then Joel would send something back, and we were definitely. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, we did a lot of listening.
We did a lot of listening.
And I think between the sketches and the listening we did, kind of formed the sound.
Yes.
That we were looking for.
Absolutely.
you know.
And obviously, when you say listening, you mean people's previously released material
Yes, exactly.
to get a flavor of what their different signatures might be.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. So, okay, let's maybe now actually, since we already sort of started, let's take it back to the very beginning of the timeline. And maybe Joel, please tell us some of the background about what inspired you to create the songs on this album, and some details about the whole minutia of how it came together.
Right. Well, I've been writing music for TV and film for a long time, and that's a very structured world. When you walk in to record musicians, you've got to have everything on the paper, and you've probably worked everything out beforehand so that the director can hear everything and approve it before you've got the musicians in there. I grew up listening to jazz. I grew up learning about improvisation and various forms of jazz and things like that. These are the records my father brought home. So I've always loved that. I've always loved the idea of improvising. And to a point, when you're scoring a film or a TV show, you can take an improvisational approach to it, in the beginning especially, or you can just continue that throughout, actually. So those are my favorite places to be, the whole concept of discovering and adventure. I like that in life, I like that in the outdoors, and I like that in music. For me, it's always like that. Like, I'll land in a new city and I'll be, okay, where are we going to go first? It's like that. So to that end, in the years prior to writing this music, I had started probably about 5 years before just writing music for music's sake. I wasn't writing it for a score, not for an album, not for a commission, not for a performance. Just write music as a process of self-discovery. And at some point, I sat down and I was actually frustrated with something, and I went into the studio and I pick up my bass and I just start playing these bass lines. And I record the bass lines. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of an interesting bass line. And then the synthesizer's sitting right there. So it's an immediate thing. You don't have to boot things up and, instantiate things and all this. So the synth is right there. And I'm like, oh, I like these sounds. I've got a bank of sounds I really like. What's that going to be like over this? And I find a sound, and immediately it's that interaction that I'm kind of hoping for in the live session. I'm having it on my own. I'm like, okay, yeah, some chords, right? And then maybe a melody. Then there's another bass line. And over the course of literally 2 days, I wrote most of the material that was on the album. Now, when I say write it, it's a sketch.
Right.
There's a period of time that has to happen after that where you really have to start thinking about, okay, let's make this a composition. There's a difference between the two. And you really have to sit down and think, okay, this is going to go here, and this melody works because of what happened before, and these chord changes set up this tension, and this is how I want it to go. So really, start to dive into it from a compositional standpoint, but again, leaving a lot of room for interpretation.
Right.
And really thinking about it just like pencil and paper. Just want that to happen. But at the point after those 2 days, I kind of felt like there was something there. And it sounded like there was a cohesion to it, like it all worked together. And I thought, this could be a record. The fun part of this could be making the recording. I've always loved working in recording studios, and it's like another instrument to me, and I feel like, oh, this could be a great way to do it. Yes, it'd be great live, but I'd love to make a recording of this. And I came up with that whole concept of no rehearsal, I want to capture the lightning in the bottle, all this. And then I called Joe, and I say, I've got this idea. It's this crazy idea. What do you think? And without even hearing the music, he says yes to producing the album with me. And then it took me a little while to send you the music, because then I got a little like, oh gosh, I got to send him music.
It's always like that when other people,
right?
Yeah.
You're going to share it, so you think, oh, I really got to get it good now. And at a point, I was like, I can't get it better than it is. I'm just sending it, And that's
Whatever's left is going to happen from the process.
Exactly. And that's an important thing also, to say at a point, you know what? I don't have to do every little thing. And you're calling musicians, producers, engineers, whoever, because you want their input. So don't even think about what you're gonna, I don't even say anything. When we came into the recording session, I kind of pulled everybody together, and I didn't want to talk about the music much, but what I said to everybody is, each of you is my voice. If I could play the saxophone, this is why I called you. You know, if I could play guitar, if I could play drums, I've listened to all of you guys extensively. If I play that instrument, you are the person I'd want to be.
Right.
You know?
Live vicariously through.
Go, do what you do. You know, let them do it. And, you know, micromanage never came into thinking. Managing didn't even come into thinking. You know, it's like, and I said to Joe, I remember before we recorded, I said, we could end up with nothing. You know, we could go in, this is entirely risky, right? We can, and then we both looked at each other and said, no, we'll
not
get
very
something.
likely.
We're not gonna end up with nothing. We're gonna get something. So, and that's
Between the talent between the two of you and the musicians you hired, the studio you were in, the engineer you were working
exactly.
with, odds were pretty much in your favor.
Yeah, but we're not walking in with set rules or set
absolutely.
anything other than these are the tunes.
Some uncertainty about it, but it was. I'm sure you weren't that worried.
Exactly.
You kind of touched on it a little bit, but the part of that question was also, you know, obviously we've talked about it, right? You're also a composer of film scores, and did you find a lot of differences in your workflow and techniques as you focused on the tunes for your album? You kind of touched on it already, but maybe you could be clear because people. First of all, this type of session doesn't happen every day of the week anymore, whereas maybe in the beginning of recording time, sessions and musicians getting together, that was the norm. I'd say it's not the norm now. It still happens, I'm not saying that, but you know, people programming in their own environments and creating their own thing is more pervasive and common than I think than the live thing. So when you create for film and for scoring, obviously you score it. It's not a one-page sheet. No. You've got the strings, and everybody's got their scoring that you have to create. So, but what's give us a feel for some of the different things you do.
I'll tell you what
both hats.
I'll tell you what the primary difference is. For me, the primary difference was getting away from having things that were wholly structured. You know, it's like I said before, I didn't program anything on this. There was literally nothing programmed. It was, when I played that synth, it was all out of time. It was awful, but that was what I needed. That's what it had to be, In film music, the music serves the film, and therefore you're limited in regards to how much, let's say, melody you can have, how much bass you can have also, what instrument is in the same range as somebody speaking. You have to be sensitive to all of those things. There's a line that you read before, which I think sometimes people scratch their head about, where you said, this is full experience music. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is the music itself is the event. It's the whole song. When we listen to a song with someone singing, we get the whole picture, and that's what everything is. Film music generally has something missing from it. If you listen to the film music on its own, it can be beautiful and lovely, but sometimes it's not giving you the whole experience.
It's missing the visual.
Exactly. So that's the thing. So we have to create something that everyone's going to have the whole meal is there.
With or without video.
That's it. Exactly. So that's the biggest difference. I suppose another one is there's no director. You're left to your own devices.
You're the director, you're the screenwriter, you're the actor. It's you, and that's a different mindset to be in when we're journey people helping other people with their visions.
Right.
And in this case, it's your vision.
An even greater magnification of that is that because you did this independently, you also had to think about, the financing and the costs of different things.
Sure.
Which is yet another hat to wear. as we wear many hats in this business. I'm trying to make sure we fully covered some of the steps you took before arriving at Power Station and then also at Power Station, because there's a whole another set of questions for what happened after that. So, you know, when you guys say we transferred files back and forth, you know, we're using Zoom, audio movers, session wire, all of the above. Tell us a little bit about the, you know, how things were done.
That was more after we tracked, and when we started getting into compiling takes, basically between the 2 or 3 takes that we had on each song, and you know, spent a fair amount of time figuring out what was best. And at that point, Joel is back in Los Angeles, in Topanga at his studio, and I'm in New York in my little space at New Noise, and I'm editing and I'm sending him files. And at a certain point, we were using audio movers where Joel, we would be live, and he would say, what about this, what about that take? We're both taking notes. So that was really at that point. Session wire came a little bit later, but there was constantly, at a certain point, especially when Joel was sending me files of, sometimes he would redo synthesizer parts that he played on the session, tweak the sound. Sometimes he would come up with new parts, and he would send me those files where I knew that they would start in Pro Tools, or he would send me a Pro Tools session because he was working between Digital Performer and Pro Tools. So sometimes it would be in a Pro Tools session, or sometimes it would be, he would tell me where the timestamp is, and I would import it into the session. And then I would kind of do a rough mix, maybe send that back to him. So there was this constant back and forth going, which then led into, once the tracks started to coalesce in terms of the editing and the master takes of the rhythm section, then we started getting into what overdubs might we consider, what guest artists might we ask. A couple of the solos had not been, there had been space left open for some of the solos. A couple of things we didn't get to at the session. So there was one point where I went to Adam Rogers' studio, and we spent an afternoon, and Joel was on the phone, you know, listening in at that point. So there was a lot of that type of activity of going. I mean, we started off in this way where let's make this thing live, 2 days. Elliot Scheiner, master engineer at the Power Station. Let's do this in this very traditional way where it's live. But then modern techniques came in, and then we can also talk about then our approach to how we wanted the record to sound ultimately, because we didn't want it to sound like a straight-ahead trad jazz record either. So that's another aspect of the production and the mixing we can get into.
There's something to add to that, I think, is the way you and I work together and how we communicate and what our sensibility is. There really wasn't a moment where we were like, oh, no, that would never work. And there were plenty of times when one of us would say, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, and we wouldn't even question it because we know we know how we work together. So we were very fortunate. You know, to have that also. That doesn't exist all the time.
That's very true. But at the same time, I would say, and this isn't, I'm not patting myself on the back, but to younger people out there, younger students, it's your job as the producer to get inside the mind and the intent of what the artist wants.
To make the artist comfortable, and, to understand what they're trying to get, to if they're confused about what they're trying to get, help them find it.
That's very well said, what you just said. You know, when they're not sure of what they're looking for too, is very important.
So,
so then, I'll jump you for a second. Please. So then after we did that, after we edited everything together and we figured out what we wanted, the next thing, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was really looking at this thing where I said I want to have some strings on the album. Right? Which,
it was the Trogs moment. What about strings?
Anybody who doesn't know that Trogs arguing in the studio, it's on YouTube. It used to be a hard thing to find. Look it up. It's hysterical.
I love it. So the next thing after that became me writing the string parts and the winds parts. So we had 9 string players and 4 wind players. And this was a great part of the project also because it was kind of like reverse engineering the album. You know, very common to go into a studio and record something and if you're going to have strings, okay, you have the arrangement done beforehand. You know how long the song is going to be. You know where the strings are going to go. You know, But in this case, we had done all of this recording, and it's like, oh, you know, like on Astral, I knew I wanted strings before we even recorded it, but I had not considered having strings on Rumi and the Whirling Dervish, and that was really fun to do, because and there was some back and forth with us about this too, because I had this idea. I knew where I wanted the strings and how I wanted it to work within the tune, and then at one point there was this spot in Donny's solo, and Joe, really smart, came up with this idea. You know, you could put a riff in right before Donny plays this, and then right after he plays that, you could have another one, and it almost sounds now when you listen to it as if Donny was reacting to the string. I think that's the order that it goes in, right?
The answer came before the question.
Exactly. But I wrote it later. It kind of sets up what he played, and it fills, and it's a great moment, you know. And then that brought up other ideas for me of what to write during solos. On Change of Heart, we also have strings and winds, and there's a small section, maybe like 3 or 4 bars, where the winds are playing in harmony to what, and again, it's Donny soloing, but they play a harmony to what Donny's playing. And so it's this reverse engineering kind of thing that was fun to do. So I took the time to write all of that stuff, right? And then you came out to LA.
Yep.
And we recorded the strings and the winds in Los Angeles. We recorded Scott on piano on Astral Protection. And then we did 3 days working with
Philippe Sayes.
Exactly.
In his home studio.
Yeah.
For mallets and
Mallets and some Rhodes, organ.
some wobble board.
No wobble board on this one. But we had, it was really like, and then acoustic piano, right?
Yeah.
Acoustic piano, electric piano.
Again, right? Because he's a Logic guy.
He's exactly. Yes. Yeah. So that was another. That was.
Yes.
Now I'm remembering. Oh, that was a whole nother thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Stems being made in both directions, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
The real definition of stems.
Yes.
We won't get into that now.
Yeah. So so that's really what happens next, and then it's putting it all together.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It really is a hybrid of a old rhythm section type recording,
Exactly.
along with the fact that it's improvisational to begin with.
Right.
And then you add in the post-production, the overdubbing and so on.
Right.
Now, there was an element during the tracking where you relied on the musicians to create stuff, and I'm sure all of it was amazing, but maybe you didn't use all of it, or maybe you used it in different ways, editing it or exemplifying something that someone added.
Yep.
So that's part of the improvisational thing you were describing,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. And as you know, you have 3 takes of something, you're going to edit between takes as well. So, but we were very careful to keep the whole band together.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know?
absolutely. Had to.
Oh, so if you slice something, you sliced it across the band, not
across
by
the-
had
accident.
to.
Yeah.
Sort of, with leakage and takes, it's got to maintain
Leakage,
alive.
absolutely. And most of the record, with rare exceptions here and there, and on the suite maybe more so, no click.
Yes.
We might have started
That's
with a
right.
click and taken it out. Some of the songs had click more throughout, but not really. I mean,
No,
yeah.
very little.
Yeah.
But you had 2 human metronomes playing the drums and percussion. So
Yes.
it's all
Yes.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and shout out to Mino Cinélu, who's with us.
Who's with us today? Yes.
Yeah.
You the man?
Incredible discography too, Mino. So yeah, a little bit maybe before we exit the power station discussion and what happened before. Elliot has a preference for 9624, so you guys worked that sample rate the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's see what else. There was some filming going on during the tracking days.
Yes.
And besides the fact that allowed you to have some really great footage for us to see and to experience, be flies on the wall, even though we didn't attend the session, there's a whole element of what the cameras bring to the session, how the musicians feel about it, and how maybe people behave, not even consciously or subconsciously. Why don't you share a little bit about that with us?
I'll go first. Yeah.
Please.
I was talking to a friend of mine about the record before we even went into the power station, and he said, "You're filming this, right?" And I said, "No, we're just doing the music, man. I just want to focus on the music." And he kind of sat me down, and I'd say about 15 minutes in, the light went off, and I was like, "Oh shit, really?
Gonna miss this
You
golden
gotta do
opportunity."
this too?"
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, that said, having done so much work in film and TV, it's quite an embarrassment of riches in terms of knowing filmmakers who I can go to who are incredibly accomplished. So I sat there and thought, okay, you know, he's good, she's good, she's good, he's good, and try to narrow it down. And in the end, it kind of became a no-brainer. A wonderful New York filmmaker named Vanessa Gould, who I'd worked with scoring her film. We get along really well. We have a really similar sensibility about things. And she's also a musician. And she has an incredibly eclectic musical taste. And we would talk about music often. So I knew she would get this. And that was important to me. It's not always important that they really get everything about it, but in this case, I felt it was. So Vanessa, along with Ben Wolf, DP, they set up 4 stationary cameras. I think it was 4, and then they had 1 camera that they used to walk around with. So the stationary cameras, like one would be set on Mino, one would be on Eric, one might have been on Scott. There were some limitations in terms of space. So the booth that we'd created for Donny was pretty tight. Mm-hmm. So if we were going to shoot Donny, it had to be from outside. And I did talk to them beforehand about what to capture, and kind of left them to be free, and it was good because I could speak in musical terms, because Vanessa would understand, oh, you know, we're going to play the melody, here's the solo. She understands the form of jazz tunes and how it works and everything. So that was really handy in a shorthand. You have to sync it to the music. You've got to be running time code. I think we ran 2 Pro Tools sessions, right? Two Pro Tools rigs. 2 separate rigs. So one would go to her, and then one was what we used, obviously. And then you've got 5 cameras in total running. So every hour that you shoot, you actually have 5 hours of footage. We shot.
A lot of gigs.
It's huge. It's huge. And you know, it's funny because I mentioned it to all the musicians before we started. I said, by the way, I've got to ask you, are you okay with us filming this? And everybody said yes. You know, this is what happens now. It's, you know, it's just what happens every day. But, you know, the crew needs to be really sensitive about being in a player's, you know,
face in space.
Yeah, you gotta, especially with this kind of music also.
Yeah.
You know, if you're reading a part, you know, I've done plenty of orchestral dates where we're shooting that, and they ignore everything because they're just, you know, reading the part that's in front of them. But here, you know, we're looking at each other, we're catching cues, we're listening to, you know, is the solo ending? Where are we going with this? So there's a lot of that, and you're making it up also. You know, it's that thing of, you know, you sit down to play something, and the minute you hit record, it's like, oh, I can't do that. You know, it's like that becomes a harder thing to think of the idea. So, you know, that's the important part. That's what I would say about it. But it went very well.
Yeah, just like when we're recording artists, when they know the red light's on, they get nervous.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
If you have the ability, I've had this happen one time. I was fortunate. I worked with a folk artist. I left the session and record for, I think it was 7 hours.
Wow.
And she just played like 35 songs.
Wow.
And we just didn't interrupt her.
Yeah.
And it was pretty magical.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So you lose the awareness of the red light.
Right. Exactly.
So on the other side, the musicians had cameras in their faces, And not that they would behave necessarily differently, but maybe they, they're getting into it. They want to get into like a vibe to
Right.
get the part and
Right.
like emotional, and they're thinking, "Oh God, I'm on camera and someone's seeing me do this. I don't want someone seeing me do this." So you have that, element of distraction
Yeah.
that you had to wonder if it was going to take away from
Right.
the magic you were trying to capture.
I will
On
add
the other
that,
side, you could light a fire where everyone gets excited
can.
and
You can.
enthusiastic about it. And,
yeah, Vanessa and Ben's background is mostly in documentary filmmaking. So their whole vibe is to kind of vanish.
transparency.
Everybody meets in the beginning, and within like 10 or 15 minutes, if you're making a documentary, the subject doesn't even know you're there with the camera.
Gotcha.
It just goes away.
Yeah.
So that's a consideration. When
Yeah.
you're shooting something,
Sure.
that has to be taken into account.
It's probably a good place for me to mention, which I should have done already, is our host today, Renaissance Recording.
Yes.
We really appreciate that. And
Yes.
one
Thank
of
you
the,
for having us.
One of the new partners here, Ian K.E.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Derek.
Ian was the person who was running Power Station at the
Yes,
time.
yes.
And so he was actually present during these sessions and is very involved in the video aspects that they had there, which were pretty amazing things. But even when they made the discovery that SD was needed for lack of latency when connecting the 3 control rooms during the pandemic, we had all the rooms connected to do recordings. So that's something they discovered there. So they've been pretty cutting edge with the video stuff, and even knowing when to use
Yeah.
less than state of the art
Sure.
for the benefit of
Sure.
it. So again, thanks Ian for hosting us, and Derek.
Thank you,
And,
thank you.
The other partner's name, Daniel, I think is Daniel. That's it. Right, got it. Good. Cool.
And thank you, Roey. You've been
yes.
amazing putting this together.
We're not
Thank you.
done, but thank you. I just wanted
We're
to-
not done.
I
But
just
just
wanted
while we're
just wanted to
mentioning it-
interject while we're talking about Power Station, the interesting coincidence that we are in Ian's new home and that he was there then. So let's see. So you mentioned it a little bit, but we can touch on it before we leave the Power Station part of this discussion. Obviously, they have great isolation choices there. You can build different size, shaped things, and with C and an A especially. So, is there some things you wanted to point out about the isolation and how you set everyone up? We have some photos we can also share maybe right now. And things like the drums, the choice drum kit and size of the kick drum and the tuning of the kick drum.
That's what it's
all
talking
relevant stuff. So why don't you share some of that with us?
I mean, we first discussed tuning with Eric when Joel and I had a conference call with each musician individually, discussing various aspects, and but we had a conversation with Eric, and he was on board with basically, yes, it's a jazz record, but we don't want it to be a jazz drum kit, So the most important part of that for us was that the bass drum should be tuned like a more modern bass drum where there's actual bottom. It's not like a sort of a lower pitched floor tom, which is usually what a jazz bass drum is more like. And he was totally on board with all of that because he's so adept at playing any style, and you could give Eric anything and he's going to make it sound amazing. So and then when we discussed that with Elliot as well, totally on board with it. So we made sure, and I was there before Eric, so I was tuning the drums a little bit before he got there, and then he tweaked them when he got there. So we tuned the bass drum pretty low, and Elliot captured it beautifully. And if anything, ultimately I ended up rolling off some subs that were beautifully captured, but that were a little big maybe. But we had this concept of it's a jazz record, and we're recording it in this traditional way, but at the same time we wanted it to sound contemporary. So that's kind of where we started, and we can get into the mix concepts too. But
And Elliot had a hand in where everybody was.
in terms of the
which
setup,
room and everything.
he was like, this is because he's so experienced and he's worked in that room so often. He knew exactly where he wanted to put everybody, and so he decided who should be where. I said, do you want to put the drums in the live room? He said no. So he was very specific, and just we were so lucky to have him to capture this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good guy and great talent as well. So yeah, that's Ian, did you want to share the photo montage? Maybe there's a couple of pictures of the session in the.
Oh, sure. Yeah, give me a little bit.
Thank you. Give us some.
Ian.
Hey, photo montage. There's Mr. Scheiner.
Elliot. Mino. Eric.
Yeah.
Scott Colley.
It's a shame you guys couldn't find any talented.
There's a
talented-
shot of the
No,
live
yeah.
room. That's,
Yeah.
that's a nice shot
Yeah,
of the.
you kind of get the
Yeah.
idea of how how everybody was. Mino was in his own booth. Eric was in his own booth. Scott was in a smaller booth, and Donnie was probably in an even smaller booth.
Right. And then the live room was just me and Adam.
Yep, exactly.
We can loop it for another minute or two so people can see that
Yep.
live shot a couple times, and then you could stop that, please. So, yeah, I think we can move. It would be good to move to what happened after Power Station. You already told us a little bit. You did some strings and orchestration with woodwind, and but there were other instrumentalists and parts to be added. So let's talk a little bit about that. How was the steps in that? Like, how did you do that remotely, or were you both together and in studios?
Combination.
Tell us about that.
Combination of both. But really, it was Joel thinking about, again, the same way that he, together, but really Joel was thinking about casting and the person, and there were spots left for things to still be done, and you started thinking about, well, who should I have here, and who should be here, and
Right.
and, you know.
Yeah. One on What Dream Is Dream, I had this idea, which really didn't come till after we recorded it.
Yes.
We kind of thought we were done with
Yes.
the tune.
Yep.
And then I said, no, I think
Yeah.
I've been listening to Brandy Younger for quite a while at that point, and older stuff, not recent things. And I thought, like, oh no, this could be a really cool vibe to have here. And then when we went to work with Brandy, we ran into some COVID issues.
Yes.
Right?
That's right. Yep.
Her engineer, right, had gotten COVID, but
So
she
that delayed the session.
right, but she recorded at home,
Yep.
and it sounded great.
Great.
She used a combination of microphones and a contact mic.
Yes,
right.
There was a stereo microphone or microphones. I wasn't there.
Right.
That were close. There were a couple of mics that were a little bit more distant, and there was a DI.
Right, and in her case, we were live with her. Or no, we weren't. We weren't live. She would record, send us stuff. We would react.
Yeah.
So we were.
But as the session was happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whereas with Randy Brecker, it was more like we spoke once, and then he'd be like, "I'm going to record this in a couple of days," and files would show up.
Right.
But with Brandy, we were literally like, "We just got it, yeah. So can you do one more?" Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. We like what you did here, but how about the?
Yeah.
That was kind of the process there.
And sorry, I should say, when we got it, what I meant is they would send us, Dropbox us her takes,
Right.
and we would pop it into the Pro Tools session on our end and listen. So that's what I wanted to be clear. Sorry.
Right. I was in LA at the time. Joe was in New York, and Brandy was in New York.
The
also.
Brandy one, I was at your studio with you.
For Brandy?
Yep.
Really?
Yeah, we were together for that
okay.
one. Randy Brecker, I was still in New York.
Then she did it when we were recording the strings.
Exactly.
That's cool. Okay. And then we did there were some overdubs with Mino.
Yep.
There were overdubs with Marcus.
Yep, Marcus Rojas.
There
tuba.
was
Another classmate of ours.
yes, yeah, exactly. Lisa Fisher.
Yep.
And then John Patitucci, but they were all recorded at your
Those
studio.
were all done at my place in IRL, as the kids like to say.
In real life,
Yep.
for those of us that don't know what to say.
Which was great. I mean, with Mino, we had things that were like, still need some more stuff here, and we still need some more stuff there, and then we changed the intro to the Mystery of Trees.
Yes.
We decided that we weren't going to have the drums that were there, but we needed like a little bit more, like a hand percussion thing, and I demoed something, and then you came in and you played it beautifully at my place. He's going, I don't remember this. Did I do that? So there was some modern or contemporary, overdub techniques that we had, and then you overdubbed on a few more things because we had odds and ends and things that needed to be done. And then you came to New York from Paris. Oh, by the
Well,
way, in the
before
middle of
that-
all of this, Joel moved to Paris.
Yeah, as one does.
As one does.
When you're recording your independently financed solo album, you
Keeps it
should
interesting.
move out of the country. I recommend it to everybody. When we recorded Lisa,
Yeah.
I was in
You
Paris.
were in Paris.
Yes. I think we were at a Seder. Is that right? Yeah, we were at a Seder.
It was a Friday night.
And Joe was recording Lisa, and I was kind of monitoring it on the phone. And that's a great example also of, this trust that we have also. For me, it was important to hear what she was singing. I didn't have to hear the quality of the recording and, be there on that. And I, completely trusted Joe, and that was all great. And we did the same with John Patitucci.
Yep.
Also, I happened to be in Florida at
Right.
that moment, actually, and listened in also. So that worked out well. And then, of course, you mentioned before the overdubs with Adam,
Yeah.
which we did at his place. So very modern in that sense. But it's important to kind of come back to the sound that we captured at the power station. That's the sound of the album. The overdubs all fit into that.
Right.
That's really it.
Gave you
'cause-
your guideline of what you needed to do to
Yeah,
what things you could add and what would fit.
Exactly. No matter how many other instruments you were adding, like Astral Projection has close to 30 musicians on it. It didn't matter. It was what we recorded, those 2 days that really
Sets the mood.
Yeah, exactly. That was the sound.
Cool. Let's see. Just keeping an eye on the clock so people don't get Zoomitis. Well, you mentioned doing those overdubs with the various people, and even when Joel was in France, he made friends with somebody that had a nice studio and was able to work from there with Joe remotely.
That's when we were in the mixing stage. You made friends with somebody who has a great studio with a great listening space.
It was bizarre because it was my landlord. It was
The way things work out sometimes, right?
Yeah, he's the CFO of a big company, but he also loves music and writes songs himself and all of this. And I just mentioned to him, like, I need to find a studio to listen to some things. He says, well, why don't you come over and use mine? I was like, what? You have a studio? So I went over and it was perfect. It was
beautifully
great.
appointed little room with a lot of lovely gear, analog gear as well as digital gear.
Yeah.
And that was the one mix session that we had together where you said, how about this and how about that? And that's when we were on Session Wire.
Right.
So you had good connection.
Very good
and he had
connection.
a good monitoring environment.
Yes.
That was
so you could hear what you were hearing.
That was great. I mean, I wish we had sort of actually, shout out to the Session Wire people who were great, but that's something I wish we had actually adopted sooner and had been using more, because it works really well.
Both be hearing the same thing without any compromise.
Yeah, because at that point we were actually hearing things like, is there too much bass here, or how do we want to
right. Sonic
do
decisions,
this? Exactly.
not arrangement decisions.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think we touched on all the various overdubs and stuff.
You know what? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there was one tune
Yes.
that we didn't get.
Should we get to that now?
We could do that now, sure.
Because I'm just thinking about the timeline that we're in.
Yeah.
It was interesting. We recorded all of these tunes, and it all went quite well. But there was one tune that we were searching.
It's funny. There was most of the songs, as most projects can be, especially when you don't have lyrics, were untitled. So Joel had bass 2, bass 4, and usually just BS, not even like spelling the word bass out. So there was one called bass 10, and I jokingly, but not so jokingly, said, "This is your single," right, on a jazz record. So I'm saying, this is your single. And we cut this track with the band, along with everything else, and we kind of were like, I don't know if we got exactly what we're looking for on this. And I think we kind of, as you pointed out, we kind of edited everything else. We kind of sort of put that to the side. And it went through quite a few transformations before we ended up with it being what it finally became. And we thought maybe we could play you some of, like, how it started off as a demo and where it ended up, because in a certain way, what got excluded was almost as important, I think, in the process of like how it actually ended up. So
I think an important piece of knowledge on this is that it became the title track and,
Yes.
and the name of the album.
yes,
Because otherwise the album would have been called Bass 10.
exactly.
Would have been would have been a hard sell.
And everybody would have thought we were talking hexadecimal.
Right.
And,
Yes.
you know, it would have been a
So Exquisite Moment is what it became. So,
kinda like that.
Ian, if you're ready, we'd love you to play those bits for us. Little
And I'll-
snippets of the various.
yes. And we'll annotate as we go. What you're going to hear now is Joel's demo of this, and it was probably the most descriptive demo of maybe all of them. I'm not sure.
It has more than 3 parts
Yeah.
in it. So yeah, there were like 3 or 4 synthesizer
Yes.
parts, and we kept all of those
Yeah, we did.
actually from the original demo.
Yeah.
And I did play bass on the demo
On the demo,
also.
yeah.
Although I don't want to get ahead of
in
it.
this, we'll get to the session. Also, this one was the only track that we actually had Joel's demo. Well, we had it in the other ones too, but they played to the demo on this. They played to the parts
Right.
that you're about to hear. So this one was very much done to a click. This
Yes.
is, you know,
Yes. Yeah.
this first version of it.
first version, Joel's.
can
Yeah,
let
you
it
can
roll.
play it.
Play
Let
it.
it play.
We'll
yeah.
talk over it.
Yeah.
This is the polybrute also.
A lot of wobble board on this one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wobble board. So, the bass part changes actually.
Oh,
so
from
we get rid of the extra notes.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
This is not Donny McCaslin. Not yet.
It's not me. It's a sampled sax.
What we call the chorus.
The sample doesn't have the high notes.
Oh, that's funny.
It's missing.
Right. Right.
Doesn't have those
Yeah.
notes. So just you know, it's interesting. 'Cause this is what the demos were like.
Right.
You know, they were really
Yes.
bare bones.
Yes. Not very
You
not that limiting.
And I didn't do the sax sample until much later.
Oh, that's right.
right?
That's right. Yes.
I didn't have any samples.
That's right.
It was just
That's
synth.
right. So this was Joel's demo. Everybody heard this. So now, Ian, if you could play what you're now going to hear, and just roll it. I can talk over it. It doesn't matter because it's
Yeah.
going to be the same thing for a while. So this is now at the power station. The musicians have a click, and they're listening to these tracks, and you can hear Eric is starting to play cymbals. Mino is playing Beautiful Colors. And Eric is playing Beautiful Things, sort of atmospheric. bass is acoustic bass. Scott is playing what was Joel's electric bass.
Yeah, the electric is out.
Right, the electric is out. Adam is there. So it's on piano. It's still Joel's piano.
It's also interesting to note, I didn't tell anybody what to play. I didn't tell Mino, I don't think, anything. I didn't tell Eric what to play. I just wanted them to react.
Yeah. There's Donny McCaslin. These motivic things that he had. All these hooks that Joel had. So we had that. You'll hear the rest of it. It goes into a sax solo in what we call the verse, right?
Yeah.
So we had edited the other tracks together. We maybe even started overdubbing on some of them, but we weren't sure exactly what we had here. And I felt that there was something about this that was, for want of a better word, commercial. So we thought, like, what could we do? So we started experimenting, and I started sending Joel some ideas. So the first thing I sent him was this idea, Ian, if you would. So I sent him this drum loop. And you're still hearing the band. It's still all the same thing, but there's now this sort of driving drum loop going through.
We get a hit from Eric.
And Eric is still playing that beautiful sort of off the beat snare drum. Melody comes in. So we had that idea of sort of like, all right, so maybe that helps, maybe that doesn't help. So then one of the next things that I sent him, I can't remember what comes up next.
It's the chorus ideas.
This was just an idea that I said, hey, how about if we make the chords in the chorus still the same chords, but what if we make it a little bit more like an LA pop kind of a sound, because the chords are sort of going that. So I sort of sent this to Joel as like an idea of like how to accompany the melody.
And I think it's important maybe to mention that we were striving for something that wouldn't make it sound like smooth jazz.
Right.
You know, it's like the entire record is not that at all, and it would have been entirely incongruous to have this, you know, smooth, nice jazzy kind of wave thing going on. It wouldn't. So we were looking for like as creative a solution as we could find. Really, we're really challenging ourselves. And at one point, when it came to this chorus, we both probably did dozens of treatments.
Yep.
Like, how are we going to deal with this C minor to F7 to B flat to E flat thing? How is this gonna work?
Right. And so, if you could play the next one, Maestro, please. I'm trying to remember
what's the vocal idea.
Now, I had said to Joel, what if instead of having an instrument play this melody, we have a singer? And I thought, my old dear friend who I've worked with many times, the wonderful Lisa Fisher. So I put up a vocal sample, a female vocal sample, and I said, I could hear Lisa doing this and ad-libbing on top of it at the beginning, and she's sort of hinting at the melody. And so you hear these ideas that I'm sort of putting as a guide for a vocal. And also I think now we have...
Now I'm playing bass.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we said, we think that going back to the original with Joel playing the double stop bass part on 2 tracks has more sustain and maybe actually has more of the vibe. So now you can hear that it's starting to coalesce a little bit to what we're sort of, well, you haven't heard the final yet, but for us, it's sort of like, it's starting to sound like what we think it's going to sound like.
Right, the idea is to It's more of an ambient kind of
Right.
feeling. We should keep going into
Yeah.
the chorus on
Yes,
this one.
we
though.
do.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah, that's fine. There was something else.
So there was another thing that I said to Joel. I said, what if, and I think this is the version that has that, I said, what if the chorus chords are like, oh no. Yeah, no, sorry, this is different. I'm getting ahead of myself. Can you turn it up? So I came up with this another way of covering the same chords. I'll just let that play for a second. Sample is doing what we think a female singer is going to do. So this little piano thing that I came up with and I sent to Joel and I said, you know, or you can turn, I think it's going to go anyway, was sort of like, well, what if, like, you know, we could get Keith Jarrett to come in and he'd be like, all right, guys, I'll show you what this should be like. You know, it was sort of like a sort of a blueprint for if a Keith Jarrett or a Carla Bley or someone came in and took Joel's chords and harmonies and kind of did something more like what a jazz musician sensibility would be with in terms of interpreting it. Didn't end up lasting. So we could go to the next one, Ian. Thank you.
It's interesting
Yes.
too that we kind of determined that it was the chord changes
Yes.
that was making that
Yes.
feel that way.
Exactly.
The melody was fine.
Yes, the melody's beautiful.
Yeah, but that was.
I'm trying to remember what happens in the verse here.
So the bass part I replayed. We
Right.
talked about that
Right.
before. All the synth parts from the original demo.
Right. Which you may have been updating as we went along too.
Yeah. Yeah, we did. Actually, we did on this.
Yeah.
One of the sounds we did do that.
Sorry, I'm not sure. I think it's when we get to the chorus that I think so.
Playing the melody here.
Maybe. It could be. I think that
Pretty much though, except for Lisa.
Yeah.
This is it
yeah.
on the verse.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's probably this is the theme thing, I think. And I think this is going to be the end.
This is my part.
But we haven't. Yes, but I think so. We haven't gotten to the part where we have to sing the chords yet, right? So what you're gonna so I said, what if the verse chords are the chorus chords?
Finishes that. Yeah.
So this is the first time that we actually stumbled on, oh, maybe it's more hypnotic, maybe it's more interesting to not have all those chord changes. So this was that iteration, which stuck. That stuck.
Yeah. And then Joe added this guitar part.
Right, there's a
also.
little guitar loop happening. You came up with more synth parts too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were some other things too. This doesn't say this clearly either.
No, no. And then we also had a piano solo. Philippe Sayes played a beautiful sort of atmospheric piano solo in this section. But we were living with it, and it's gonna fade in. You can fade it, and we're like, yeah, it's beautiful, but it's not exactly what we're looking for. So another idea I presented to Joel was, what if we have an acoustic bass solo, which will be sort of like more of like a jazz statement in a way, but we'll ask the player to play off the motifs that Joel had. So playing off, you had da 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 in the guitar, and then you had the answers to the saxophone. Da, 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 da. I thought these were all great hooks. So then I said, here's I sequenced a mock bass solo on upright bass sample, sort of hinting at all of these different motifs, and we weren't sure yet who we were going to ask, but if you could play it, please, Ian. as a guide for whoever, and also to see if Joel likes the idea. That was the other. Like a motivic variation of one of his melodies. So we had this, and it was like, yeah, okay, it should be an upright bass solo, and you got in touch
And
with
who should play the bass solo? So
who
start
should play the
talking
bass
about-
solo
about that.
exactly. And we did get Lisa, she came in, and who should play the bass solo was
We
was
settled on John
yes,
Patitucci.
and he was
Which is not settling, by the way.
settled on him exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
settled. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not settling.
Yeah,
I-
not settling at all.
I've
one of
got
those
to be very
compromises we
clear
have to
about that.
He called he called us back immediately and was just so gracious and
Such a pleasure to work with.
Yep.
Such a great collaborator. He called me up and just talked on the phone for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
It was
And
It's
the other
great.
wonderful thing about John in this instance especially is that he's composing a lot of music as well. So some, especially jazz musicians, might have felt sort of like, hey man, like, you've sort of sequenced the solo and you've got all this motivic stuff in it, and it's like, I'd like to kind of do my own thing. As a composer and as a generous artist himself, he said, oh no, I get it, I love it, I'll make that work. And he did his own thing, incorporating all of Joel's motifs. And great.
No,
you
it's
know,
fantastic. It's great, and that you touched on an interesting point also. In almost in every case along the way, all of the musicians we worked with, who are improvising and playing off of each other, they're all producers themselves. They all have their own record career. They all write music. So when you have people like that with a sensibility in the room,
big picture,
and they know that they're there to work on this project and it's not their project. That's one of the funny things.
Yeah.
It's like, you're recording and you hit the button on the talk back after and say, that'll sound great on your project, but how about the, but that didn't happen here at all. It was fantastic that way. So the balance was very healthy.
Yeah.
Is how I would say it. And then do we have?
So shall we play the whole
final
thing?
version?
How it ended up?
We can certainly play a little bit of it.
Sure.
Because there's two other topics we want to touch on
Absolutely.
before we run too late.
Here comes the original, the final.
Yeah, if you have.
Lisa Fisher, John Patitucci.
us a lot of, I use this word all too often on these panels, insight into what went on. Two other little things we should touch on. One is shorter than the other. Let's talk a little bit about the mastering and who mastered it, and whether or not it was mastered also on vinyl, or tell us a little bit about that.
This is another fun part of the process where we start listening to records again and listening to other work and who's working in this space, and does it matter if it's somebody working in this space, and all these things. But one person kept coming up over and over again, and that was Alex DeTurk, who was mastering at the time out of the bunker.
I think
right?
it's the same place,
Is it still
but
the
now,
same
but I
place?
think it's called now Alex the Turk
Okay.
Mastering. If I have it correct, I hope I
Okay.
do.
And he seemed to have a sensibility that we felt would work well for this. We didn't really talk about the mixing,
Right.
Which we should touch
Yeah.
on. Joe
Yeah.
mixed the album and did a really amazing job. And I'm mentioning it now because when Alex got it, he didn't change much.
No.
He raised the levels. No offense, Alex.
No.
Um,
So that's
He's-
actually
but-
one of the signs of a good mastering engineer, is to know when to do and
Yeah.
when not to
He's
do.
great. I think of him
Yeah.
kind of as like a mastering whisperer. I
Yes.
like Alex a lot.
Yes, he is, and he's so great to work
Yeah.
with. He was so easy to work with and so accommodating. It was, he was fantastic. And then mastering for vinyl, we worked with Chris Muth. Thank you for
Yes.
correcting
Well,
me
he's
on
an old
that.
friend, so I know
Old
how
friend,
to pronounce
Yes,
it.
yes. And that's a different process. It's the test pressing comes back and you listen to it and it's like, it doesn't sound like what I thought it would sound. It doesn't sound like what we did, So it takes a minute to adjust and say, okay, this is what it is. Should we talk about Rumi a little bit?
Roomy in terms
Of the vinyl mastering?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we had some anomalies and some noise issues, and things were overmodulating, and we ended up backing off a little bit high end on a certain track because I was boosting a little too high, which in digital was totally fine, but was making the right channel go crazy on one
So
of
you
them.
would make adjustments to the mix file
I made-
for
I-
the vinyl master.
I made one adjustment to one track after the fact for the vinyl because it was freaking it out. It was-
we had the option. You
Yeah,
didn't have
you didn't
to.
have
do it.
to.
But we all.
It was
and
like
you were
it
so
was
generous
it
about
was so
doing
easy.
it.
Was
Yeah.
it was in my interest.
Yeah.
But we should talk a little bit about the mixing because we
Yeah,
didn't
definitely.
want to mix it like a straight ahead jazz record.
Yes.
And at the same time, it's not as compressed as a pop record, of course. We tried to go as far as we could, but at a certain point, it felt like we were marring the performances and the dynamism, literally and symbolically speaking, of the solos and the performances. Also, the musicians are very specific about how they wanted their instruments to sound. So I was very cognizant of that, and at the end of the day, not wanting somebody to say, "Oh man, he really changed my sound." But we wanted it to sound like a contemporary, sort of like a pop record, but not to the point of where like it's just sort of squashed. And it's an interesting thing because I think cognitively too, in the world, we all kind of need stuff to be more compressed because everything is so loud. It's not. I don't even think of it anymore as like competing with the record that comes before you. It's more like competing with ambient noise and sirens and the fact that I think people's hearing is people are getting numb in a certain way because everything is so loud. But we didn't want to go crazy. It's this interesting balance of wanting to mix it like a pop record but not mix it like a pop record.
Yeah, I'll have one
Please.
thing, and it's more of a question. Actually, I'm going to take you apart for a second. We approached this as a creative
Right.
mix.
Yeah.
We didn't want to just take what was there
Exactly.
and represent it and make it sound good.
Yeah.
The idea. So, what did you do to do that?
There were
basically?
at the end of Exquisite Moment, I'm like using granular reverbs and sort of panning things out and sort of creating transitions with things that they played. With Donny, who was very open to processing his saxophone, I would add octaves, I would add all these repeats, I would do things, So it was sort of like there was nothing in terms of adding effects and things. There was no holds barred. It was sort of
Right.
like if it worked, then it didn't detract from the intent of the performances and from Joel's intent as a composer. It was sort of like oh cool, it takes it to another level. So that was fun in that sense.
Yeah.
But it was always like, let's compress it a little more. Yeah, it's starting to encroach on what these beautiful players were trying to accomplish. At least that's the way it felt to me while we were doing it.
And that's when we turned to Alex.
Exactly.
Really. And
I knew I had a brick wall limiter on my bus, and I would turn it on from time to time, and I knew that when it ended up in mastering, that it was going to have to be sort of squashed like another 6 dB, but hopefully in a nice way. And I wanted to leave that to somebody else. And Alex.
The mastering.
Yes, exactly.
Cool. Well, if there's more details about the mixing you want to touch on, otherwise there's one other little subject which can't really be too short, although we want to keep the time in mind, which is some of the things you have to do as an independent artist to promote, to the steps you took when the record was released in June, in its recent release, and getting it reviewed and getting it placed and getting it streamable in all the various many different streaming sources. And just tell us a little bit about some of that stuff you had to do on your own as an independent artist.
This has been an entire education. This is like going back to school and learning again. Fortunately, I have somebody I work with social media. She went to Berklee maybe 10 years ago or so, maybe a little less. And she mentioned a book to me, which was actually really helpful. And then I just started going down the rabbit hole with all of this stuff. The book is How to Make It in the New Music Business by Ari Herstadt. And it's like this, and it's like probably the only music business book that's been written by a musician and not a lawyer. And it's a really, really good perspective on it. And even though he's coming to it from pop or contemporary music perspective, everything applies no matter what you're doing, because the essence of what you're trying to do is find your audience. So in my case, I'm not playing live. I'm not out there doing gigs and then said, hey guys, let's go make a record. I'm making the record first, right? And while I might be known in the film world, in the film scoring circles and things like that, in the jazz world or even in the recording music world, I'm nothing. When I started, I think there were 100 people on my Spotify account who were listening. I had 375 people following me on Instagram. It was really small. And everybody who followed me on Facebook was somehow related to film and TV work. So it's truly starting from scratch. Mm-hmm. So the first thing you have to do is you have to get your music onto the streamers. At this point, there are some people who don't put their music on it, but for a new artist, I think it's imperative. So then the question is, do you find a distributor, or do you go with DistroKid or something like that? In this case, a friend introduced me to a person who runs distribution companies, and I felt a little more comfortable knowing I could call somebody and with a question and get help instead of anonymously going on DistroKid and sending it in. So that took care of the digital distribution of the album. I didn't even think about physical distribution other than Bandcamp. So my Bandcamp page is run by me. I do that myself. And recently was introduced to a distributor in Japan. And the album comes out October 25th in Japan. Where CD. Right now it's just the CD. But hopefully vinyl too. But in Japan it's more about physical product than it is about streaming. So you start to then get into culturally what's different in different places. This kind of music is, I would say, less embraced in the United States than it is in Europe and Japan.
Well, Japan loves jazz.
Yeah, but Europe is a huge market for it. So, you know, that comes into consideration as well. But then it's like, how do you get the word out? How do you let people know it's there? I hired a publicist. I hired a radio promoter. My take on this, after talking to a whole lot of friends about this who do this, was this time out, at least the first time, was get the education and be holistic about it. So where someone might say, yeah, radio, you know, what are you going to get from that? Who listens to the radio these days? You know, it's the album's playing on over 500 radio stations.
That's great.
So, and it's on Sirius, and they got it into a lot of great places. So, okay, that might account for something. You know, maybe there's another person who also went to Spotify and started streaming it through that, or maybe somebody bought a CD. So I figured, okay, we'll do that. Publicity, the publicist I worked with, who did a great job, he's focused on getting new releases out there. So you start to learn that it gets really granular. It's not just jazz, there's mainstream jazz, there's smooth jazz, there's other types of jazz, so you need a publicist who specializes in what you're doing. And his whole thing was about getting the album reviewed. So it's very, very specific in that sense. And I'm still not playing live. That's one of the missing links.
That's something you're planning on doing with this project?
Yeah, definitely.
And would you assume that you would use the same musicians if they were available? Because that's a tall order. Or you would put together a working performance band?
I would love to work with the same musicians. Nothing would make me happier. That would be fantastic. And if that's doable at any point, I would do it. But we'll have to see. You know, I don't know. Right now, at this moment, I'm focused on music for the next record. And once I feel comfortable with what we're doing there, then I want to start rehearsing. Then I want to, you know, so that we're playing live when that record comes out. That's kind of the idea, that we've already been playing before that comes out. It's a really important part of promoting your music these days. It's talked about in Ari's book also, and how important that is. And then the other really important part is social media. And you can't, it's hard to underestimate what you can do in social media. Especially since I need to reach a place that goes beyond these borders. So I want to reach Japan and I want to reach Europe. And I've even seen a fair amount of people listening and social media following from South America as well, which is nice. I experimented with some paid ads on Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, and did like a week or two on Spotify. For me, it was really confusing. I was working on something else at the time. There was a lot going on, and I pulled the plug on it because we weren't really seeing the results. And this is the thing, you need to like learn where your audience lives and how they react to things. And then Meg, who I work with on social media, had this, well, why don't we boost a post? Let's do that. So it's not an ad, you take an actual post and you hit the boost button. And you can spend as much as you want on that. We decided on like $10 a day. So let's see what that does. We've been boosting various posts, which have been videos. So now I'm going back to the video conversation from earlier, because I think that's really been key. People seeing the music played and seeing how it was created has really helped.
It's your version of playing it live.
It's all I've got right now.
It's what's available for you to be seen live.
Exactly. So we boost the videos, and I think it's been about 2 months we've been boosting. For me, it's gone from 375 followers to now close to 2,800 followers. This is just Instagram.
Good.
So it's been growing really well, and the nice thing about that is it's organic. You're not buying this stuff, because what happens is it shows up in their feed and it says suggested for you, so it's not an ad. It doesn't say sponsored or anything. And then if they like it, they've got to click on your name to see more. And if they want to follow you, then they've got to click on follow you. So there's two more steps to it. So if they're following you, they want to be there. That's my point. So it's legit. And then you get all the the feedback. You can see where everybody's from, what the age ranges are. My audience is 75% male and 20% female and 5% other. So it's interesting. It's really interesting. It'll come into play more when the next record comes out and when we're playing live. That's when it'll be meaningful that way. But it's all about engagement. You've got to engage with people. And then about a week and a half ago, we hit a milestone when some piano player out there took one of the tunes
That was amazing.
and played piano right over the tune and posted it. And I was like, wow, now we've hit another level. It's kind of funny.
That was great.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And playing like serious stuff.
Yeah,
too.
he was playing really well.
Yeah.
It was super. So yeah, don't underestimate it. Don't shy away from it. It's part of what it is.
Sounds good.
Yeah. I hope that wasn't too long.
No, not at all. We could do a panel on the
just
various things, steps you took, and so on. So
Yeah.
that's a very nice summary. I did have one or two other questions that I had planned that I didn't ask as of yet. In a moment, we'll ask if anyone has a question here in the room or from Facebook Live. We'll read it from your comment. Just put the question in the comment if you're watching and you have a question for us. Let's see. Maybe just a short. Was there any specific thing for either one of you or both of you, the highlight of this project? What was it for you, Joel, and what was it for you, Joe? If you were to pick one highlight.
I spent, as Joel did, I spent so much time listening to things, over and over again, and just marveling at how beautifully these musicians listen to each other and respond to each other, which was really, the music just didn't get old working on this project, especially because of that. And being a drummer and just sort of listening to Eric Harland, it's just the way that he plays and the way that he thinks about playing, and it's very different to the way that I think about playing, and it just opened up all sorts of doors for me in my head in terms of how to approach playing drums. That listening to the music over and over again, and these musicians, and I had my favorite tunes as well. I always loved Trees. So those were, listening to them and getting deeper and deeper into their interactions was very rewarding.
Yeah.
That was one of the highlights.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
And for you?
Yeah, no question. Listening to how everyone plays together, and also in working with everybody who brought so much generosity, and they just brought all of themselves, every single person on this, and that's just, you can't beat it. The interesting, maybe somewhat anecdotal highlight for me though was something that I had not planned, which was playing with everybody in the room live while it was happening. It was only a week before the session that I said, maybe it's a good idea if we have, because we didn't do any acoustic piano, maybe it'd be a good idea if we had like a Fender Rhodes or something in the room, just in case I need to check a note or a harmony or something like this. And, the tunes are going and suddenly I'm playing, and I'm not much of a piano player. So it was really fun.
You played great things. It was great. You were
nice.
kind of egging them on. You were filling in spaces.
Yeah.
It was like the composer is in the room.
Yeah.
Adding important
Speaking
things.
with a voice besides what was on the page.
We kept a lot of what
we kept
what you played.
not all of it, but
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
it. Yeah. But it was just so much fun. Even before we did the first session, I was calling it the pinch me session.
Totally.
Because it was like, this is you know, how great is this going to be? You know?
And I'm sitting there next to Elliot Scheiner. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, just like pinch me. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
At a little place called the Power Station.
At a little place called the Power Station, and then bringing it back to Berklee, you know, our alma
Yes.
mater, and you know,
Right.
so it's
And all the other studios you worked in later.
yes.
The whole experience of it.
Yeah.
Yep. And you and I worked together in Studio A.
Studio A
Power
year,
Station.
yes, like almost like 20 years prior, basically. Yeah,
pretty much.
Basically on a
Yeah.
film score where you had
Yes.
me do some orchestrations.
Yes. Yeah.
My most glorious session in this industry was a Power Station session at the age of 21, tracking Roberta Flack with Quincy Jones.
Wow.
How fantastic.
Wow.
And it's one of the like highlight sessions.
How fantastic.
With a lineup of amazing musicians
Yeah.
and of course we couldn't talk about it
Wow.
because Quincy was working on Michael at that time. Oh, what have I done? So, but it was incredible.
I'm sure.
So, that's when I first met Roy over at Berklee, and
Sure.
I've always been trying to find a way to top that session. It just hasn't happened.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
But,
It's a high
Roberta
bar.
Flack has quite the voice.
High
It's-
bar.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very high bar.
Of course, it was great working with her, but just all the musicians on that session
Sure.
this was mind-boggling. And Quincy, I have
Sure.
a story with him as well that I'll share when we go out later. We're going to open up for questions if there is anybody in a second. Is there any way, if somebody is interested in contacting either of you to, pursue possibly working together or to find out more for
Yeah.
Joel?
For me, the best way to do it is through my website. You can do it through social media also, but the website is
which is joelgoodman.com?
joelgoodman.com.
Is a good man, Joel.
There you go.
Okay, and for you, Joe, because you are not on Facebook, and that's okay. But how can someone contact you if they
Email is fine. Joe at newnoiserecords.com, and New Noise is N-U. N-O-I-S, yeah.
New,
yes,
new.
N-U, yeah. But Joe at newnoiserecords.com.
Okay, very good. Okay, so any questions in our live audience?
I got a quick question. When you mentioned the process for the after the mix,
Yeah.
for the mastering,
Yeah.
regardless of the if it's vinyl or the other one, did you have to provide stems, or was it a 2-track?
No, 2 tracks.
Really?
2 tracks, yeah.
You really committed to.
Yeah, and then,
Yes.
but I said, hey, if there's something you need for me to if I to me mastering is like you're going to the doctor almost. It's sort of like somebody else is sort of telling you what they
Be a
so.
painful experience.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I used to love going to mastering. Since the pandemic, don't really do that so much anymore. But I always say, hey, if there's something you hear, if you want me to turn the kick down in this song, or
Sure.
so there's always that possibility.
There was no ego, obviously, the way you approach it. But
Yeah.
I was curious because, of course, especially since you both work a lot in a movie, it's like it's getting the mastering for the visual now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite a bit of that. It's insane the amount of
Yes.
of,
Yeah.
of steps. I was wondering, but the sound, really, bravo! It's fantastic.
Thank
the
you.
Sound,
Thank
the
you.
visual. Also, you guys didn't talk about much about who did the visual. It's really the whole package. Even I remember when you sent me the stuff. and
Yeah.
the
Well,
blue,
Vanessa
really-
Gould,
Yeah.
Oh,
Joel
Vanessa
works
did all
with
of
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
She did also for the
She did all the editing. She did all the videos. Everyone.
Okay, we're talking about also the package is the presentation
Ah,
of
that.
the CD.
Oh, the CD.
The artwork.
So that's
Artwork.
that's interesting. So I've been friends with Dave Bett for over 30 years. Dave we used to live near each other. He's a Grammy-winning art director at Columbia Records, and so he'd be my first call, and we've worked together on various other projects over the years, and he's a great guy, and I love working with him, and he's even helped me with other visual things I needed afterwards. So he was the art director on it. Then Davey Evans is a British artist who created all of the flower kind of stuff on it. Dave Bett brought Davey Evans into it, and his work. If you should look him up online, Davey Evans. He's fantastic. The things that he does, and then the picture of me was another photographer in Los Angeles. So it's a mixture of a lot of
You
different
guys are so large.
things.
That's fantastic. Really, cool. Bravo. Really, I'm very
thanks.
happy.
Thank you
to
for
be
being part of it.
But
Thanks.
you guys were, really.
Always
thank
great,
you.
you know. Okay, anybody else? All right, we're going to close up the
Chuck,
stream
come
in a
on.
moment, and we'll have the raffle with the guests that are here. And thanks everyone for joining us today in Facebook Land, and everyone who came to Renaissance Recording. Thank you very much for hosting us. And
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rowie.
Rowie.
my
Rowie
pleasure.
has really been fantastic.
My pleasure.
Really great.
Always want to share with
Thanks.
the society and bring everybody up to speed on what's happening in our industry. So thanks both to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Much appreciated.
sir.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right.
Join us next week at Eastside Sound.
Start swearing
On
now.
the 19th, we have an event there.